Hello YouTube, KotaCode here with a new tutorial series on Gamemaker. In this series, we're going to make a fairly simple maze game. The goal is to make you somewhat familiar with the engine, and this series will be targeted at very new users or those with no experience whatsoever. Basically, if you want to make games, but you've never done anything before, you're in the right place. Now to get started, I'm going to assume you have Gamemaker. Either Studio or 8 should work. I'll be using Studio. You're going to want to open up the application and go to the New tab, and we're going to save it in a directory. Usually I like to keep all of my projects in one directory, but it doesn't actually matter where you save it. I usually keep all of my games in one folder though. Then you're going to want to give it a project name. I'm just going to name mine Maze for simplicity's sake. You can follow along if you want for the tutorial, or you can name it whatever. And then hit create. Once the program opens, you'll see a whole bunch of things on the screen. First, on the left-hand side, is your resources. You have sprites, sounds, backgrounds, and objects, and a whole bunch of other things that we're not going to get into in this tutorial. Down here you have your compile messages. You can pretty much ignore those for now. We'll get into those later. And then up here you have like a little taskbar at the top that is going to give you a whole bunch of different options, such as run, it's how you'd actually test your games, and little buttons to create each of these resources. You can also create a resource just by right-clicking the folder, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to make a resource called a sprite. A sprite is basically an image in a game. You can have your characters, they would be sprites, the enemies, they would also be sprites, the ground, and a lot of the walls, and coins and goals and anything, they're all pretty much going to be sprites. Sprites can have transparency, so they might have empty space inside the image that you can see through. Sprites can also be animated, so you might have multiple frames and it'll loop through them. There's also backgrounds. Backgrounds can't be animated and also can't have transparency. So you'd usually just use them for the background of a main menu or something, rather than a sprite, which would take up more space. Normally with resources, you want to name them in a specific way. You don't want to use spaces in the name, because that will cause a lot of programs when you're coding, or that'll cause a lot of problems when you're coding. And usually you want to denote them in some way so that you know what's a sprite and what's an object and stuff. So I usually put SPR underscore for all of my sprites. And I'm just going to name this one SPR underscore player. Then you can hit edit sprite and it'll open up the editor that comes with Gamemaker. You can also use an outside editor such as GIMP or Photoshop or something if you want to, but the one inside Gamemaker is going to be good enough for this. And then you can hit here to just add a new 32 by 32 image. Double click it to open it up. You can use mouse wheel to zoom in, or you can click the buttons. And you'll be given a checkered board. As you can see, you can draw around. It's a pretty standard, simple little paint program. You have your tools on the side. You can change the size of the brush. And you have colors. We're just going to draw a circle. So select the circle tool. Make sure we have it all filled in. Start in the top corner. And have a circle as our character, just to make it really simple. We're going to save those, and there we go, we have a player sprite. Now the sprite by itself won't actually be able to do anything, it's just an image. To make the image actually move and interact with other things in the game, we need to create an object. An object has a sprite that kind of sits on top of it, and the object is what actually does the work. It actually can be manipulated. So we'll create an object for it. Objects I name in a similar manner, just obj underscore, and then the same thing as the sprite, so player. Then we come down here, there's a little drop down box, and we can select the player sprite as the sprite for our object. Now objects work in a way where you have events, which is when something happens, and actions, which is what they do when the event happens. If you don't quite understand this right off the bat, that's okay. You'll kind of start to grasp this concept a little bit more. And it's not too complicated once you get the hang of it. But basically, you have actions such as maybe pressing a button on your keyboard, or when this object collides with another object, or clicking with your mouse, or when it's created. Any of those type of things, you can have it do a bunch of things. We just want it to be able to move when you press the keyboard. Alright, so we're going to add an event for left, and we're going to also add events for all the other directions. But to start off, we'll just add one for left. And we're going to come over here, and you see there's a bunch of different tabs. These are all your actions. You can actually use a lot more actions if you use code, which is over here, but we're going to do that in more advanced tutorials. For now, we're just going to stick to these little drag and drop buttons. If you go to the Move tab, and you drag over the first, like the very first button, you drag it into there, you'll be presented with this menu. Now, we're just going to select the left arrow and give it a speed. Speed is how many pixels it moves every step. Okay. Now, games work in a loop, right? So, every second, and you can change this, but in Gamemaker by default, every second, the game will loop through 30 times, right? And we want our character here to move over 4 pixels to the left when the button's being held down. We want them to move over 4 pixels to the left for like over and over again every 30 times a second, which sounds really fast, but it's only 4 pixels, so it won't be too much. We're going to hit OK, and then we're just going to do the same sort of thing for each of the directions. So we'll just do that really quickly here. Get one for up. Obviously you select the right direction for each one. Okay, so now our character can move whenever these buttons are being held down. Now, when the button's pressed, he'll start moving, but he won't stop moving. You can obviously change his direction if you press one of the other keys, but we want him to just be able to stop when you're not pressing the key. So we're going to add another event that's keyboard no key, and then we're going to drag in the move, and we're going to hit the middle, leave the speed at 0, and hit OK. So now when none of the keys are pressed, he should stop moving. We have our player, we can hit OK. You can come up here and save the project whenever you want. And we're going to add a new room. Rooms are basically where the game takes place. Think of it like the window. Except it's a little bit more than the window, but we'll get into that later. But for now, just think of it as the area inside your window. And you can add objects with their sprites and such. You can also make the background have a background if you add a background to the game, but we don't have any right now, so we're just going to add our player. It doesn't really matter where you add them. It should start on the Objects tab, but you can switch between them. Just make sure your player is selected, should be the only one, and just add one in. You can always delete them by right-clicking if you accidentally add multiple. We're going to make sure we save that and run our game real quick. Down here we'll see as the game compiles, it'll show us a little log about it. Now if you come over and press the arrow keys, you'll see our character moves around. And it's actually that simple. He should stop when you let go of the keys because we have a thing so it checks when he's not pressing a key. And he'll move in each of the directions. We can close our game, and you can mess around with it a little bit if you want by changing the speed, or maybe trying deleting the no key, and also maybe adding some events so you can have WASD. It would be obviously the same sort of thing, but with the directions in those. And the next tutorial should be out soon. Next time we'll get a little bit more into rooms and how to move between rooms and basically what they are and how they work. But for now, this is all we need. See you next time. Peace.